perhaps you can tell because my voice is quite different. And for those of you watching on television on the Salem TV network, I don't look like Hugh Hewitt either, and that's because I'm not Hugh Hewitt. I am former Congressman John Campbell. Now, for those of you who maybe have been Hugh Hewitt fans for a long time, Hugh's been on the Salem Radio Network for about 25 years now. I was actually a guest on Hugh's show in his very first week that he did this show for Salem Radio Network, and I have been a guest or a guest host on and off over those 25 years. So if you are a fan of Hugh Hewitt and have been listening for a long time, you are familiar with me and maybe perhaps familiar with my voice. But if you're not, and you're just tuning in now because Hugh has had, I think, 3 or 4 different time slots in those 25 years, and you were used to listening to Sebastian Gorka, or perhaps you were listening to Hugh when he was on in the early mornings, which was too early for me, a guy living in Scottsdale, Arizona, spend some time here in Southern California. But if you were listening then, you probably aren't familiar with me. So just a brief little bio on me. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I married literally the girl across the street, the captivating Mrs. Campbell. We have been married for, it will be 46 years in a few months. We have 2 sons, and each one of those sons has 3 children, so we have 6 grandchildren. I was in the early part of my career, I was a CPA, and still am a CPA, certified public accountant, very different from Hugh being the attorney. I was in the car business. I was a car dealer for a number of years. And then I was elected to the California State Assembly, the California State Senate, and then I spent 10 years in Congress. I tend to do money. CPA, when I was in Congress, I was on the Budget Committee, Joint Economic Committee, and the Financial Services Committee. And so that is a little bit of a background on me. So I'm not new to politics. I'm not new to this radio show. I'm rather new to seeing myself on a screen on TV. I did do quite a bit of TV when I was in Congress, but not really as the host, mainly as the guest. So let me start out, since I do money, and talk a little bit about Doge and about what's going on with Doge and what I see as the Democrats' response to Doge, which is amazingly familiar, as I will describe. But when Elon Musk first came out and said, oh, I'm going to save $2 trillion, I was quite skeptical. I know I know the budget pretty darn well. I know how much is Medicare and Medicaid and the other entitlements, which, by the way, we all think of the 3 big entitlements of Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps and student loans and those things. There's actually about 300 or 400 of them total. And a certain amount is interest and a certain amount is defense, obviously, and so forth. So I was a little skeptical. I'm becoming less skeptical when you see what this guy is uncovering and what he's overturning. And let's remember that when Elon Musk took over Twitter, now X, and by the way, you can follow me on X on Look Through Chaos. That's THRU Chaos, Look Through Chaos on X anytime you want. But after he took over Twitter and renamed it X, he let go 85% of the employees at Twitter. 85% of them gone. And anybody who was on Twitter before and is on X now, forget the political aspects of it, what was censored then and what he's doing now. It operates better. It is a better platform. It works better, it's more flexible and so forth now than it was before, with 7 times more people. So when I see what he's doing, we all know the federal government's inefficient. We all know people who work for the federal. I remember my first trip to Washington is when my parents took me as a little kid when I was 11 years old or something like that. My first trip when I took my kids to Washington, before that, my next trip to Washington was in the early 80s, and I remember going to somebody's house who lived in Virginia, and next door was a guy who worked for the government, and he was going out to his car to go to his office, and he had a little thin briefcase. This is back before computers, before phones, before all this stuff, when you actually had a briefcase and you put papers and stuffed pens and stuff like that in it. It was so thin I couldn't believe it. And the neighbor said, oh yeah, there's nothing in it. He doesn't really do much at the federal government, but he likes to make people think he does, so he carries a briefcase around. This is not new, the idea that the federal government is not the most efficient place in the world. So when you look at what he's doing, you think about, I now think the savings they might do are greater than ever. And then let's take a look at the entitlements. Now the Dems, we'll talk about them in just a second, but what he's found is that we've got people over 100 years old, many of them, some over 150 years old, collecting Social Security. What else is in there in fraud? When I was in Congress, we were told that there is a thing in the Internal Revenue Service where you can get a refund of taxes even though you didn't pay any. If your income is below a certain level, it's a refundable tax credit. You pay in no tax, you get a check back. It was estimated back then that 30% of all those checks sent out were fraudulent, that people were making up fake people, stealing Social Security numbers, dead people, whatever. And you just file a return and say, I didn't really make any money, but I worked hard, and they send you a check. And Medicaid, we know in Medicaid there's been Medicaid mills for years that make up fake patients with fake sicknesses. And how much of that stuff is in there? So now what are the Dems doing? The Dems are out saying, oh, they're going to cut Social Security, they're going to cut Medicare, and they're going to hurt veterans. Folks, this is not new. This is not new. Do you remember Paul Ryan when he was Speaker? And we're talking, 10 years ago now, or 8 years ago, or something like that? When Paul Ryan was Speaker, the Dems did a big campaign of him pushing grandma over a cliff. And this was a big ad campaign they did that he was going to destroy Medicare. And he was going to push grandma over a cliff and so forth and so on. This is not anything new. When I was first elected to the California State Assembly, we're talking 25 years ago, in the California State Assembly, I was proposing reducing some spending. And one of my Democratic colleagues got up on the assembly floor and said, Assemblyman Campbell is going to kill children. That was their message, right? I was trying to cut out the waste in a certain program, and because California had a huge budget problem at that point, huge budget problem, and you can't print money when you're a state. When you have less revenue than spending, you either have to raise the revenue or cut the spending. You can't just print the money or borrow it like the federal government can do. But she said I was killing children. She was actually forced to go up, which she really hated to do, stand up before the assembly floor and apologize, because you're not supposed to say things like that about people. But the point is this is not new. Democrats for decades, whenever anybody tries to reduce spending, we are going to hurt seniors. We're going to destroy Medicaid. We're going to destroy Medicare. We're going to destroy Social Security. We're going to throw Granny over the cliff. We're going to do all this. There's nothing new here, except here's what is new. Donald Trump has said, he said in his first term, he is not going to cut Social Security. There are a lot of people, a lot of Republicans who think it should be reformed, and I can talk about that later, but he said he's not going to. And he's not going to cut Medicare. He's not going to do it. And when they say he's hurting veterans, you realize what they're doing. What is it? I think of the total population, I think less than 10% are veterans now. I think it might be, let's just say it's 10% for sake of argument. So what they're saying is if somebody gets laid off in the Department of Education and 10% of those people are veterans, then he's hurting veterans. Well, if your job isn't needed, I don't care what you're in, whether you're a veteran or not, you find another job. That's what you do. We've all done it, right? A job you had went away, something that you didn't like it, they didn't like you, whatever. You find another job. That's entrepreneurship. That's capitalism. You do that. So he's not going to do that. But yet they're out there saying, oh, it's all over the place now. And this is their message. And clearly this is what they're going to carry into the next election. But let me tell you what I think DOJ is doing, what we should do. Is let's just see how much of this is waste. Some Democrats are actually supporting waste, fraud, and abuse. Astounding. But the stuff, this Democratic Party, I call the neo-Marxist party, because that's really what they are, the stuff they are supporting is unconscionable. Not just that I don't understand it, and I can't support or understand why anybody would support that stuff. But on top of that, there's no justification of any sort, and the people don't support this stuff, a lot of it. But let's see what waste, fraud, and abuse is there. Let's eliminate all this stuff. Let all these people who aren't doing the job. If we have 10 people doing a job and we can do it with 4, let's do it with 4. If we can do that, let's see that. Let's get rid of the Medicaid mills and so forth. Let's root those out. The money that's going out to people who don't exist, let's get rid of all that and let's see where we are. Okay? I think we're going to be in a lot better position. I think we're going to find there's a lot more savings than certainly I even thought back when I was in Congress, than I think a whole lot of people think. So again, this is former Congressman, I need to say that. I've been out for 10 years, but you know what? Once a congressman, always a congressman, I guess. This is former Congressman John Campbell filling in for Hugh Hewitt on the Hugh Hewitt Show. And I want to welcome to the show Noah Rothman. You there, Noah, from National Review?
I am, Congressman. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. I was reading here, and if I have this correct, you have a book coming out in July, and it is called, I believe, The Rise of the New Puritans. Is that correct?
Well, it came out in 2022.
Oh, it came out in 2022.
But it is as relevant as it ever was. So yes, I appreciate it.
Tell me about the new. I have not read the book. Okay, I have not read the book, but I think I'm going to have to now. Tell me about the New Puritans.
Well, essentially, it starts from a question, which is that for most of my adult life, the elements in the politics, the body politic writ large, that were suspicious of and perhaps even contemptuous of your leisure activities because they had the capacity to degrade you, pervert you, and corrupt society around you, were all on the right. They were conservative. They were not necessarily paranoid, but certainly suspicious of apolitical aspects of the American social compact. That dynamic has flipped in recent years. It is no longer the right that is so suspicious of your leisure activities, but the left that they believe they have the power to pervert you, corrupt you, and contribute to a degraded society, a morally degraded society. And that you see manifestations of this all over the place. Why do comedians emphasize the pain that they had to go through so that you could enjoy something as trite as a laugh during a punchline? Why is racial politics injected into sports broadcasts, shoehorned in there just so that you can no longer enjoy the unalloyed experience of athletics? Why is cooking and recipes perverted with political ideology just to steal from you the prospect that you could enjoy anything in the absence of enduring the pain of living in an imperfect world for even a couple of minutes? It's a puritanical outlook. And when you start to see it, you see it everywhere. And so this book identifies... I'm sorry, continue.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it's fascinating that you say this because I have thought the same thing. I haven't said anything publicly about it. I've just thought it. And Puritans is a great word because Puritans were very religious people, and the left generally doesn't like very religious people, with the possible exception of some Muslim groups, but they generally don't. But let me ask you, you wrote the book 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, whenever you wrote it. Yeah. If you were to, and maybe you already have, I don't know, but if you were to do an addendum to it today on how things have changed, how it's gotten better, worse, different over that period of time, what would you say?
Well, I think it's gotten better, but it is attributable for now, and I'm holding my fire, to a sense of shock and betrayal that has followed the election. There is a sense abroad on the left that something has to change, and something has to change in them. They do profoundly resent it, but they understand the environmental conditions that are inducing at least a critical retrospection on their behavior and an audit of their conduct politically and moving in the past and moving forward. I don't know if that's going to last for very much longer. It is because the Puritanism that I identify in the Progressive Project is inherent to the Progressive Project. The book makes the stipulation that the libertine sexual revolution was a deviation from left-wing political thought in the United States. Progressivism, as we understand it in the late 19th century, arose from the ashes of the Puritan experiment in mainline Protestant New England, had a very moralistic element to it. Prohibition was perhaps the foremost experiment of the Progressive Project in the beginning of the 20th century, and it was very much a moral project as well as a political project. And you can point to any number of elements of the progressive agenda in the late 19th century, early 20th century that buttress that idea. And the book is organized around, and part of the reason is that this is not necessarily an aberration from American political philosophy. I try to organize the book in terms of virtues, because this is a moral philosophy. It is an attempt in Gertrude Himmelfarb's formulation to remoralize American society. So the book is organized around chapters: prudence, piety, austerity, harmony, the fear of God, those sort of things that are by themselves in isolation virtuous. But when they are applied, as I apply them, to apolitical aspects of the American social compact, it frustrates their adherents because these things are not subject to legislative amendment. They exist outside the political process by design. So when you start focusing on these things and trying to use politics to reshape American culture, you get very frustrated by the process. And two things happen. One of two things happens to you. One, you get very depressed and withdraw because your wholly moral designs on this system are being ignored, and so you just withdraw from politics, or you resolve to radicalize and attack the foundations of this deeply immoral system that is blind to your appeals. And we see that everywhere. We see it all over the place. So this is just an attempt to reorient the American observer to say, okay, what is politics and what is not politics?
Yeah, let me ask you into, just because, I mean, in the 60s, and I'm old enough to remember those, that the left, if you will, the people that followed Eugene McCarthy and all that, were, and the Democratic Party, arguably, their cultural positioning at that point was not at all puritanical. But today it is. What happened? Or do you disagree with my perception that in the 60s that Democrats there were more or less fair, if you will, than they are now?
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I think it's true. And I do make the case in the book for the kind of revision to a mean. And I do suggest that, as I said earlier, that the libertinism of the late 20th century left-wing political movements was a deviation. But there were dissenters in the intellectual left from that libertinism. And a lot of them have found a voice today. You have people like Andrea Dworkin, for example, who is a feminist scholar who had very limited purchase when she was alive and working. She was a very radical theorist, her presupposing that heterosexual intercourse was itself violative, was itself a species of rape. And that sort of thing just didn't have broad purchase, save among very radical left-wing feminists in her time. It has broad purchase now. In the wake of the Me Too era, you had a variety of political and cultural activists who were adopting Dworkinism, sort of repopularizing Dworkinism. And this coincided, by the way, with a sort of neo-prohibitionist outlook towards alcohol. During the Me Too movement, there were progressive outlets and progressive institutions that came to a very socially conservative conclusion, that being that when you have a social situation in which men and women who are single are gathered and that whole situation is bathed in alcohol, socially destabilizing things can happen. And it needs to be curtailed.
There's the music coming up. You can follow Noah on National Review. So go to National Review. Noah, thank you so much. I brought this all up because I believe firmly that culture is upstream from politics, and that if you lose the culture, you will lose the politics. So I want to just give you a little bit of breaking news. We'll get more supposedly breaking news. We'll get more on this later, that Ukraine agreed to a minerals deal with the United States. So as we get more information on that, one of the things you can be sure as you listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show, that you will get breaking news. And by the way, for those of you who actually enjoy listening or hearing me or what I have to say, the show, as shocking as that might be, you can follow me. I write a blog basically every week on lookthroughthechaos.com. That's lookthroughthechaos.com. And you can find me on X on lookthroughchaos. There it's THRU. Hugh believes that's because I went to USC and can't spell. That's actually not true. It's because X only allows your handle to be so long, and the correct spelling of through would not be allowed. But one thing, mortgages. I'm going to show here the 10-year Treasury yield. The 10-year Treasury yield is really important for a lot of things. But you know what it's very important for is mortgage rates, and it is down a bunch today. It is 4.298, so let's call that 4.3. Less than, 2 months ago, it was almost 4.9, and it's now 4.3. So that's 60 basis points, 0.6 of a point lower. You know what is based off of that? The 30-year mortgage, 30-year home mortgage. So if you're going to get a mortgage, let's talk about Sierra Pacific Mortgage and andrewandtodd.com. This is the lowest we've had. The Federal Reserve raised rates. They raised short-term interest rates back in September. And when they did, the long-term interest rates went up. And the 30-year mortgage went up back at that point. It's now down, and it's coming down. If you're thinking about a mortgage or refinancing a mortgage or buying a new home, you're in a lot better shape right now. You're going to get a lower rate right now than you would have a month ago, 2 months ago, even 4, 5, 6 months ago. And one of the things that the Trump administration and Secretary Bessent, new Treasury Secretary Bessent, is they're really focused on that number, because they know if that number stays low or gets even lower, that affects 30-year mortgages, and that affects housing prices and housing values. So if you're going to do that, you should go to andrewandtodd.com at Sierra Pacific Mortgage, good friends of Hugh Hewitt, or call them at 888-888-1172. That's 888-888-1172. Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian will be there. They will answer your call, and they will tell you what you need to know. And one of the things you'll find out right now is that the mortgage rates are on the way down. Give them a call or go to their website. Okay, so I want to play a clip here. Let's play. This is Representative Hank Johnson. I served with Hank Johnson. He was there when I was in Congress, those many years ago, from Georgia. Let's play cut number 5.
If a president willfully failed or refused to comply with a court ruling, they could be held in contempt of court theoretically, but it would be up to the U.S. Marshals Service, which is a part of the Justice Department, to be the enforcement arm for the federal courts. Is that correct?
Your hypothetical would have to play itself out.
It would be the U.S. Marshals who fall under the Department of Justice who would have to carry out the contempt order. And so what would happen if the U.S. Marshals Service, under the command of the Justice Department at the direction of the president,
Okay, let's cut this because we're running short on time here. But this is Hank Johnson. He basically is suggesting that U.S. Marshals should arrest Donald Trump because some court orders came out that he hasn't complied with, disagree with. Of course, he never said that about Biden or Obama or anybody else. This is the same guy who suggested that, was it Wake Island or was going to
Guam.
Guam. That Guam was going to tip over because we had too many troops on it. Tip over. I will never forget that happened when I was in Congress, and the general who was there kept a straight face and said something like, "No, Congressman, we really think there's a very low possibility that Guam will tip over." Our guest this time is David Drucker of the Dispatch. Now, David, if you are wondering why I played the Byrds singing My Back Pages, is that you and I go back a long time. You covered me long before you were in the Dispatch, when I was in the California State Assembly. And so I played that song because I was much older then. I'm younger than that now. Are you?
I'm grayer than I was. I think when I started, I had no gray. Now I'm grayer than you.
Oh, well, okay. Well, there we go. But anyway, we have been together and done things for a long, long time. So, but you are now in Washington, where I once was. I am not now, but I want to play cut number 12, which we are now going to talk about.
So we're planning to take up our budget resolution as early as today, which is a major step, as you know, to unlock the process in delivering President Trump's America First legislative agenda. We're very close right now. As you just heard the Leader Scalise, explain, there's always more work to do right up to the end for a big vote like this, and this is a big one. We're very, very close, and we're excited about the progress, and I'm very positive, and I'm absolutely convinced we're going to get this done.
For those of you on radio, that was Speaker Johnson basically saying that they are going to get a budget resolution passed off the House floor tonight. Are they, David Drucker?
I mean, I wouldn't bet on it, but I'm not saying it won't happen. You know, as you recall, John, I mean, even when House Republicans had 40-seat majorities, they really couldn't do much without really making it hurt. And here they have no margin for error. And I don't mean that as a cliche. I mean, they literally don't have any more votes. They don't have any votes to lose, or I think maybe they can lose one and just one. Literally, that's it. And this is a really heavy lift because you're trying to get a bunch of members to do things that they don't want to do because either the budget resolution is too vague or the budget resolution doesn't cut enough or it cuts the wrong things or things like that. But again, if they had 10 votes to give or 20 votes to give, it wouldn't be a problem. And you're not going to get Democratic votes because they completely disagree with the president's fiscal agenda, particularly as it relates, as I would say as it relates to, but particularly given the activity with this, Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk has overseen. They're not happy about how that's being run, and so it's just created a lot of bad blood legislatively. So you're not going to get Democratic votes, and we don't yet know if they're going to get Republican votes. I think eventually they'll get something, because you need, I don't want to get too in the weeds for people, but as you remember better than I do, you need this budget resolution to pass in order to get to that, what we call reconciliation package, so that you can pass the president's priorities in a way that it can go to the Senate and not be filibustered. That means there are limits to what you can do. They have to be tax and spending issues that relate to each other. But otherwise, if you produce normal legislation, it's subject to a 60-vote threshold in the Senate, and we know that's not going to happen. And so that's why this is such a big deal.
So, David, when I was there and in the majority, and I was there in the majority for a little bit while George W. Bush was president, and then while Obama was president, I always said, when the Democrats, no matter how slim their majority is, needed something, they always got it together, because by nature they're collectivists. They're a union shop. They believe in the power of the collective, and we all do that. Republicans by nature are individualists. And I wouldn't change this, by the way, but Republicans by nature are individualists, and I was certainly one of them, very individualist. I remember when Kevin McCarthy, before he was speaker, but back when he was majority whip or majority leader, would come up to me and say, John, I know I can't convince you. Just tell me how you're going to vote. I know you're going to vote the way you're going to vote, but just tell me how it is so I know as I'm counting votes, when he was the whip. But the difference is George W. Bush couldn't persuade people. Obviously, when Obama was president, there wasn't a president to make people do things. Donald Trump is a different animal. And from what I'm reading, it sounds like the people on the more moderate end of the conference are going to be okay with this. And that it's the people, maybe the Thomas Masseys and so forth, on the right edge of the conference that are having trouble with it. Can't Donald Trump go to them and say, look, this is about what I'm trying to do. You support what I'm trying to do. You gotta go along?
And no doubt he's going to do that. But the moderates always want to govern, so they end up giving in one way or the other because they don't want to hold up progress. It's just the nature. It's just like a personality thing, right? So for the hardline budget hawks, they have always seen the imperfect as the enemy of doing, as the sort of way they avoid doing something they don't like. Right. They want all or nothing. That's what they want. You experienced this in Sacramento. You experienced it in Washington. And there aren't enough votes to overcome them. So he's going to have to really twist arms. He doesn't really have any cachet with Massey, I will add, since we've focused on him. He tried to oust Massey in a primary. It didn't work. So Massey is a true free agent. And there's no amount of Trump cajoling that's going to do the trick. But with others in his genre of member, eventually he ought to get them somewhere. But for the hardliners on spending issues, they never want to make progress and then come back for more and come back for more. That's what the Democrats do and why they come together. They're willing to take a small bite and then come back for a bigger bite. And Republicans seem to always want the biggest bite possible or no bite at all, and it leaves them without making any progress.
Well, right now, I think that's a function of this presidency. I mean, this is the disruptor presidency, which I will talk about in a future segment, but that he wants to disrupt things, and you don't disrupt things by making small changes. You disrupt things by making bigger ones. But the other question I have for you, David, is let's just say they pass this off the floor tonight, that Speaker Johnson, what he said at the beginning of this segment was right. But there's no details in this thing. When do the details get put in?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, that's the thing, is they have to pass a very loose framework. And then they have to get to the old cliche, the devil's in the details. Like, what are we really voting for? Right. I saw an interview with Jody Arrington, or Jason Smith, excuse me, who's the budget chairman on Fox Business. And he was asked, what about cuts to SNAP and nutrition assistance? And he said, we're not doing any of that. All we're doing is saying you have to find X billions of dollars in the agriculture, budget. In the agriculture department's budget. What are those cuts going to be? Nobody knows.
Yeah, okay. David Drucker, where can people follow you?
TheDispatch.com.
There you are, dispatch.com. Thank you, David Drucker. Let's talk about Big Pharma for a minute and pharmawindfall.com. You know, when I was in Congress and I was elected 20 years ago, I went into Congress and I was for Big Pharma. And I was for them because they create life-saving drugs and pharmaceuticals and all that kind of stuff, and I was for that. And then along came Obamacare. And when Obamacare came along, Big Pharma sold out. They sold out to the rest of us. They sold out our health care, our protection, and saved themselves, got some things they wanted to save themselves in Obamacare, let the rest of us hang out there, and ended up supporting Obamacare. I was so mad. I called all the lobbyists from Big Pharma into my office, and I said, you know what, I'm done with you guys. And I went and sponsored a couple bills that they hated. And because they sold us out. They went and made a deal with Obama to protect themselves, but not to protect those of us, the American people. And that's what pharmawindfall.com is about. It's about having conservatives for lower healthcare costs and realizing that Big Pharma is not something that does that. So go to pharmawindfall.com, and you can read about what they're doing to protect us, healthcare consumers, from what Big Pharma is trying to do. And you know, I mentioned at the top of the hour, part of my background is I'm a CPA, I'm an accountant. And you know, we are kind of organized people, is what we accountants are. And you can't see the desk, but I walked in. This is Hugh Hewitt's desk. This is Hugh Hewitt's show. He's a lawyer. You know, lawyers, as far as, you know, being really organized and really like everything's, you know, how many lawyers are, you know, they got stuff piled on the desk and they got all this stuff around and junk. And you go into an accountant's office and it's all neat and it's all orderly. And, you know, I'll take a piece of paper and I make sure it's aligned with the desk. It drives the captivating Mrs. Campbell crazy because she will come in to me, that is my wife of 46 years almost, and she will come in and make it crooked, which will drive me crazy, and then I straighten it back up. But that is amongst the things that I've noticed here in the Hugh Hewitt Show as I fill in for Hugh Hewitt. For those of you who want to follow me, you can read my stuff, read my blog. I write it pretty much every week on lookthroughthechaos.com. That's all one word, all spelled out, lookthroughthechaos.com. And if you want to follow me on X, go to lookthroughchaos, THRU. In that case, the other is the full spelling, Look Through Chaos, and you will find me there on X. So those are two places you can follow my work other than here. And I am a guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show every Wednesday, and expect I will be a guest tomorrow, even though today I am the host. We have a lot more coming up for you on the Hugh Hewitt Show. We have several more exciting, interesting guests. I am going to talk to you about the disruptor. I teased this last segment, the disruptor that Donald Trump is, and why it's time for us to do that. Not to beat around the edges, but disrupt what's going on in Washington. Boy, does it need. I am not Hugh Hewitt. I am former Congressman John Campbell, and I will be sitting in for Hugh today. Hugh will be back in this chair tomorrow. For those of you who have listened to Hugh Hewitt or watched him for years, you are familiar with me because I was a guest on Hugh Hewitt's show in his very first week with the Salem Radio Network, those 25 years ago, and have been an occasional guest host and guest over that period of time. But if you are new to the Hugh Hewitt Show, you may not be familiar with me. I am a CPA, was a businessman, went to the California State Legislature for a few years, and then to Congress for 10 years. And now I am living in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I write a blog at lookthroughthechaos.com and post on X at lookthroughchaos, THRU, if you wish to follow me. But you're not here to listen to me just because it's me. You're here because you want to know the news and you want some analysis of that news, like Hugh Hewitt does for you so ably normally 5 days a week, but only 4 days this week because I am filling in. Now, so one thing I want to report that's just breaking, and this is from the Financial Times, the London Financial Times, which Hugh Hewitt reads, and so do I, actually, about Ukraine agrees minerals deal with the U.S. Ukrainian officials say Kiev is now ready to sign the agreement on jointly developing its mineral resources, including oil and gas, after the U.S. dropped demands for a right to $500 billion in potential revenue from exploiting the resources. And it goes on about the details of it. So we'll see more on that. But isn't it funny? Now, all these things, Trump says something and everybody says, no, it's never going to happen, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, well, it is happening. Well, I guess maybe we can do this. Maybe there is something we can do. So obviously, for that to matter, there has to be a deal to end that war in Ukraine and with Russia, and we are a ways off from that, but we'll probably be talking about that a little more later in the show today. But another thing I want to read you, and this gets into something I'm going to talk about here for a minute. This is another breaking news today, is that a judge, a U.S. district judge in Washington, D.C., by the name of Lauren Ali Khan, and she was appointed by Joe Biden and passed out of Judiciary Committee in the Senate by an 11-10 vote. That would be very narrow. And then passed, they needed Kamala Harris to break the tie to get her this judgeship in the Senate when Biden was president. So if you remember, you had from West Virginia and Arizona, a couple of moderate men. For her to have to break the tie, that means some Dems broke and voted with Republicans against this particular judge. Well, she ruled against the Trump's administration freezing federal grants and loans, and rather than a temporary blocking of this, she has declared it to be basically a permanent blocking. And the reason she said she said that his blocking of federal grants and loans had to be stopped because it is, quote, irrational and imprudent, unquote. Now, I have to give credit to Generalissimo Dwayne, even though, he's not a producer. This show doesn't have a producer, but he is sitting over there. So therefore, he is here. And he pointed out that clearly she drew this from the irrational and imprudent clause of the U.S. Constitution. I'm sure that she did that. But I bring this up because I've seen this. I was in office. I now live in Arizona, but I was in California State Legislature, and I was in Congress from California, from Orange County, California, here very near the place where the Hugh Hewitt Studio West is right now. And I have watched this sort of thing happen with state judges in California. When you get total lefties in control, their belief is that the actual words of the law don't really matter. The actual words of they matter a little. And the words of the Constitution don't matter that much. What matters is what is right and what is just and what is fair in the view of that judge. Which, by the way, means you no longer have the rule of law. It means it's gone. There is no rule of law. There's rule of person. And that is what authoritarian regimes are. That is what monarchies are. They're rule of person. And so when she comes and says that you can't do this because it's irrational and imprudent, there's nothing in the law, nothing in the Constitution that says you must void things that are irrational and imprudent, because that obviously is a judgment in the eye of the beholder. And so I'm sure what she thinks is irrational and imprudent, I probably think is outstanding. And I'm sure what she thinks is outstanding, I think is irrational and imprudent. That's why you don't do this, because then it becomes the rule of man and not the rule of law. And that's what the left is about. And that's what they're doing. And that's why I mentioned, for any of you that had listened in the last hour, and of course you should always listen to all 3 hours of the Hugh Hewitt Show, that what I see in Donald Trump right now is that he is Trump the disruptor, and that's what he wants to do. I was in business. I'm a CPA, but I was in business, car dealership business. I ran car dealerships for 25 years. I came in as an accountant, but eventually became the general manager, operator, and then eventually minority owner, and then majority owner over a 25-year career in the automobile business. And I never walked into a dealership that was making money when I got there. Because I'm cheap, I either bought dealerships that were brand new points, new existing, or that were losing money. Now, if one had been losing money, which is the typical situation for me, what do? You go in and you disrupt it. And you disrupt it because it's losing money. This is a business. We can't do this for very long. If we lose money for very long, by the way, not all of them were making money when I was done. So I wasn't able to fix them all, but I fixed most of them and made a very good career. But you go and you disrupt it. And you say, you know what? we're going to let this person go. We're going to let this person. We're going to do this. Instead of having 20 people in this department, we'll have 15 people in this department. And we're used to do things this way. We're going to do them this way. And we used to advertise this way, and we're going to advertise this way. And we used to buy inventory like this. We're going to buy inventory like that. And you disrupt it because you have to change it because it's broken. Okay, and I hate to say this, but making America great again means again because it wasn't. Suddenly, it's not great anymore. It's broken. And a lot of it is. The fundamentals, Americans are not broken. You watching on Salem television or you listening on Salem Radio Network are not broken. You are not part of the breaking, but the government is broken. It is, the deep state is real. And I know I've been saying this, we've been saying this forever. And because the media, and we're going to get to the media later, but the media has been a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party for at least 25 years and arguably longer than that. Just a total propaganda arm. You'd say deep state, oh, there's no, deep state. You're just a conspiracy theorist. I can tell you it was there. I saw it. I knew people who worked in departments under George W. Bush or later, some of my staff were senior officials in the first Trump administration. And one of my former staffers is in the cabinet right now. And these people, when they were in these departments in the federal government, would tell me how the bureaucrats there would either actively try to do the opposite of what the administration wanted to do, or at the worst, or at the best, they just wouldn't work. They just thought, you say, hey, we want to achieve this, we want to change this, we want to change this regulation, want to do whatever. So you can't change that by just being around the edges. You have to disrupt it. And so whether it's the budget, whether it's what DOJ is doing through that, whether it's what's happening in the Department of Defense. You know, we went away from having, I remember Rush Limbaugh, who began what you're watching right now, talk radio, basically started conservative talk radio low those many years ago, back in 1988 when he first went on the air. And Rush Limbaugh used to say the purpose of the military is to kill people and break things. Now, on the left, they don't like to say, ooh, that's bad. That doesn't sound nice. That doesn't, whatever. But you know what? That is what it's for. And what I want in the military are people who are really good at killing people and breaking things. You want warriors. By the way, I'm not a warrior. I was not in the military, never was. And you know why? I would be terrible at it, absolutely terrible at it. But some of the people who are really good in the military probably wouldn't be very good at what I'm doing. God made us all differently. And God gave every one of us skills and talents, things you're good at, and some things you're not so good at. And God didn't give any one person good at everything. That's just the way God made us. And those who are warriors, boy, I have a lot of respect for those folks because I'm not like them. But I can't sit here and talk to you. And the freedoms I have are because of those people. It's because of them. And I understand that. And that's what we need in the military, are more warriors. And that's what I see this administration is going to do. Foreign policy. He's disrupting foreign policy. Not just who are our friends, but what are our interests? What are the national interests of the United States? Can we really afford to police the entire world going forward? Do we really want to? There's a whole lot of reasons I thought things at one time. Then now as time goes on, you see, maybe the world's changed. Maybe that's not the way it should be. We have Christine Rosen from the American Enterprise Institute on our show right now. And by the way, when I was in Congress, AEI, American Enterprise Institute, other think tanks like this, for those of you who haven't been in Congress, which I think is most of you, you have no idea how valuable these people are to us. We have staffs, and your staff does things, but they're working with constituents. These are the people who dig into the issues and dig into the details and give the information you make so you can actually make law and policy that makes sense. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And I also enjoy country music, so we should have had the whole segment about country music next time.
Well, this is who's your favorite country artist right now?
Okay, so I love Dolly Parton. I'm sorry, because she's more than an artist. She's a force of nature. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, there's no question about that. No question about that. Okay, so I was reading some of your stuff before you came on here. See, show prep, that we do things. You wrote a piece called The Era of Artificial Friendship. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, I think as a lot of your listeners probably know, there's been a lot of hoopla about chatbots and friendship bots and all this AI-driven technology that's supposed to help us have new artificial friends and, maybe help in the school setting. And so I wanted to look into those and see if it's actually realistic, this idea that humans should be friendly with bots and what it might mean. And it's a little worrisome. These are very sophisticated AI driven chatbots that encourage us to attach emotionally to them, to make them our so called friends. There's even a device you can buy that you can wear around your neck and it'll track all your movements and send you text messages throughout the day. And it's called Friend. And I worry that these might replace some of our in-person, face-to-face friendships, and particularly for young people, that they might not be able to distinguish between a real friendship with another human being and these chatbots. There have been a few really tragic cases of suicides and other emotionally disruptive interrelationships between the bot and the human. And so I just kind of did an overview of where we are today with the bots.
Now, how is this? Certainly, it's been in conversation since the pandemic, certainly that a lot of younger people were isolated, and that now this is not chatbot, but that all their friends became their friends that were on Facebook or their friends that were on then Twitter or whatever it might be. So there's been a lot of discussion out there about younger people who believe that those are their friends and that therefore they're not making real friendships, which are the only kind I had the opportunity to make in the 50s and 60s because I'm older than dirt. But it's how is this related? I mean, I assume there's some kind of a connection here between what you're writing, a bot, which is different than an actual person on Facebook. But do you see a synergy here or what?
I think a lot of our online relationships have habituated us to the idea that there's really not that much difference between the digital version of friendship that you have with acquaintances or social media followers, for example, on the one hand, and an AI-enabled bot that learns while it chats with you more about you and feeds you more of the same sort of compliments you might like, suggestions you might want to follow through on and purchase things. So in that sense, we're already halfway there to accepting a form of artificial friendship with some sort of AI enabled bot. And again, as adults, and for those of us, I also didn't grow up with this stuff. The hybrid generations of us can look at this and go, oh, it's not that big a deal, or, oh, who would really believe that? But we need to see this from the perspective of young people who grow up living a lot of their lives on the screen, spending more than 8 hours a day staring at screens, conversing even with their human friends through a screen. They're much more willing to accept the idea that they can have a friend who's a chatbot. You also see adults who maybe are lonely in their relationships or unhappy in their work situations, finding these as a sort of therapeutic emotional outlet, but then becoming overly attached, because if you think about it, human beings get tired and cranky and pick fights, and your perfect chatbot isn't going to do that. So that seems to be a more compelling outlet for emotional exchange for lots of people.
Well, not me. I don't get. But I guess what is the answer here? I'll tell you a little story. This is from the last few days. So my wife, the captivating Mrs. Campbell, and I have 2 sons and 6 grandchildren, and my wife loves to tell the grandchildren stories, and she makes them up, about aliens or animals or whatever, and she makes them up. And her father did that with her, and she does that, and she loves it. So. Grok 3.0, I think it is, just came out on X, Elon Musk's latest AI interface. And so she went on Grok 3.0 and said, make me a poem. I forget what it was, about a whale makes a friend with a seal or something like that, for a 6-year-old. And what she got back was amazingly good. So we sent that to our sons and we said, does this make Grandma, the captivating Mrs. Campbell, is she obsolete now, telling her stories? And of course, the answer from our sons came, no, of course not, she's not obsolete. But I mean, in a sense, that's a little what you're talking about, isn't it? Or
Well, the concern is that people will start to prefer the artificial thing to the real thing. And if you think about AI, especially in creative acts like storytelling or creating art or music, there's still a very parasite host relationship here, right? That poem seemed really good because it fed off the creative work of human beings that came before and created that opportunity for it. And so you do hear from a lot of people in creative fields now concerned about the fact that if they are rendered obsolete, that people will, first of all, be willing to accept these sort of AI generated, mediocre, but good enough ways of doing things. Now, if you're talking about someone who's creating a technical pamphlet about something they need to hand out, I don't think most people would think that's a huge creative loss. But when you're talking about art and poetry and literature and music, these are things that I think as human beings we need to start defending our ability to do in a unique way and protect against the encroachment of an AI that would just hoover that all up, turn it into information, and churn out something that looks like it was made by a human.
And how do we do that societally, both what you're saying about art and music and creative arts, but also about, as you were saying, younger people determining that their chatbot is their only real true friend they have on earth? What do we societally do? That's one of the things you at AEI do, is talk about societally, what do we do?
Well, one of the with children in these chatbots, I think we do need to start thinking about some warnings that are either embedded in the chatbot itself, how we deploy these. There are already some lawsuits pending actually by parents of children who've either committed suicide or had harmful effects because of their relationship with these chatbots. So we need to be cautious in the same way we would be cautious about any substance or thing that we think might be harmful to children. We need to treat these new technological tools exactly as we'd treat any other substance or thing that we know to be harmful.
Christine Rosen, where can people follow your work?
They can go to aei.org, and I have a page there, and most of my stuff is on it.
Very good. Thank you, Christine Rosen, very much for that fascinating. I don't know about the rest of you, I had no idea that there were chatbots that people were befriending right now. Oh well, scary, but there's stuff that isn't scary, which is I'm filling in here in Hugh Hewitt's ReliefFactor.com Studio West. And so here I am in the studio, and I have a window over here, and I look through and I see Generalissimo Dwayne, who is the non-producer of the Hugh Hewitt Show and has been the non-producer since the beginning. And Generalissimo, I have not
You
been
call that country music, by the way?
That is great country music. Who was Adam Youngman? Who was that? What? Who? Cody Johnson. Oh, because that's good music.
If you want country music, you start with Chris Stapleton, and then there's everybody else.
Well, okay. Chris Stapleton is great. I love Chris Stapleton. I actually have him on CD. I buy physical music, if you can believe that.
Okay.
Still now and then. But anyway,
Now,
I was
you were
looking
saying,
at
yes.
I was looking in at you.
Yes.
And I haven't guest hosted here for quite a long time.
Yes, because we were in the middle of the night, and
That's
you weren't.
Right. That's right. I didn't like getting up in the middle of the night. I did it once.
Yes.
I did it once, but it was many moon ago. And though many moon ago, I would look in, and you were fat.
Well,
And now I'm looking in, and you don't look quite so fat. And I'm wondering, is it a distortion in the window? I mean,
yes,
I mean,
yes.
what is it? Is it how come?
I changed the prescription on the lens of this window.
That's what I figured.
Yes.
Because you used to be really fat, and you're not even close to being fat anymore.
No, I am.
Well, how come is that?
Well, because I actually decided I didn't want to be that way anymore, so I got in touch with myphdweightloss.com, and I lost about 50 pounds.
Oh, so you got myphdweightloss.com, and did you call them at 864
644
1900?
That would be the very number.
Was the number again, was it 864
644
1900?
Yes, I talked to a nutritionist who came up with a formula, a schedule that I could eat based upon my screwy overnight hours that you refused to keep. And I was able to lose 50 pounds, and by and large, I've kept it off.
How long did it take you to lose 50 pounds?
12 weeks. I lost
Wow.
50 pounds in 12 weeks.
That actually is absolutely stunning. I mean, every once in a while, I used to be able to when I was younger, I could eat anything I wanted. It didn't
Right.
matter. And I couldn't gain weight if I tried. That is no longer the case now that I'm old as dirt.
When you get older, it gets a little tougher.
Now that I'm
doesn't
old
it?
as dirt. So, but I mean, if I gain 3 pounds, I get upset. I try to lose 3 pounds. It takes me like 4 days to lose 3 pounds. And you lost 50 pounds
Right.
in 12. I mean,
Right. The trick is you got to cut out sugar. You got to cut out a lot of carbs and stick to a pretty solid protein-based diet. And if you're disciplined and you stay in accountability with the nutritionists you're assigned to, you can lose the weight.
At myphdweightloss.com or call it
864
644
1900.
All right, thanks. Okay, so a little bit of news here on we always talk about stock market. Stock market has closed now, and it was the Dow was up 160 points, and the S&P 500 was down 28 points. But the thing I want to comment on that's most interesting about what happened really in the markets today is that interest rates were down pretty much across the board. They were down, but definitely the 10-year, which is what affects mortgages, I mentioned that last hour, was down. Oil was down, and the dollar was down. Why is this important? Because these are three things that Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, and Donald Trump want to see happen. They want interest rates, long-term interest rates. Bessent's made it very clear. He doesn't care what happens to short-term interest rates, but long-term interest rates, which affect borrowing and buying big things, cars, houses, etc. They want those to come down. They want oil to come down because that's how they get inflation down, because the price of energy affects everything. Everything. There is nothing in this studio that either doesn't run on energy or took energy to get here. And the other thing is they want the dollar down because that makes it easier to export. All those three things happened today. Frankly, that's really hard. The stuff that they're trying to do in the economy and then keep it growing while all this happens is a hard lift. But hopefully this administration will be able to do it. Byron York on the program now. Byron, you there?
I am here. Thank you.
Very good. Of the Washington Examiner and Fox News. So I'm going to try and cover two things with you right now, Byron. First, so Trump comes out and says, that Zelensky, that Ukraine started the war and that he's a dictator and so forth. So on the left goes absolutely crazy. The propaganda media goes absolutely crazy. Very little that Trump does is without some plan or objective or some what do you think he's trying to do here? Or was this occasionally he does just flip off and say something? Where do you think this is?
Well, you raise a really interesting question. I think you're right. Trump usually has some purpose behind what he does. And I would just say to begin with, Russia invaded Ukraine. That's just a fact. Now, there are a number of people who emphasize the provocations they say that Ukraine and NATO and others engaged in before the invasion. But the fact is Russia invaded Ukraine. So what is Trump doing? And I have to tell you, my answer right now is I don't really know. But I will say that this Ukraine, his Ukraine strategy has been cloaked in secrecy, but I think it's pretty clear where it's going to end up, which is if you look at the map of the territory that Russia holds today, that it has taken since the invasion and before, it's about 20% of the country in the eastern part of the country. I think it's pretty clear Russia is going to keep a good bit of that. They give up some. Ukraine will get back some. They'll come up with some sort of provisions to prevent future conflicts, and then the fighting is going to stop. There'll be a deal. I think that's what's going to happen, and I think everything that Trump has done up until now has been directed in trying to get the two sides to that point.
The way I look at it, and by the way, the reason I'm asking you that question is I don't know the answer to it either. So, but the way I look at this is that Zelensky is going to have to accept pretty much whatever deal gets made, assuming that it's not a deal that says Ukraine goes away, and I don't think that's not the deal they're going to do. But why does Putin do it? What's in this for him? What is going to be the carrot that he agrees to do it?
Well, part of it depends on what Putin's original intention was, and I don't know. I mean, did he want to take all of Ukraine, the whole thing? Certainly, the invasion was pretty broad when it started. Did he really just want to get that kind of strip of land along the east that he controls right now? Was that the idea? I mean, there had been a war in the Donbass basically for 10 years before the war started in 2022. So I don't know what his actual goal was. We do know that the war has been incredibly costly for Russia in terms of human life, in terms of injured, in terms of military equipment. It's just been enormously expensive. Obviously, they've had help from other countries, and the Russians. I'm not an expert on this, but they've apparently just never cared at all about the lives of their soldiers. They've just thrown them at the battlefield by the thousands. And this has been extremely costly. So stopping that would be a real benefit.
Yeah, although, World War I, World War II, the Napoleonic Wars, the Russians throwing their soldiers into a meat grinder is not a new condition. And certainly a lot of what I've read or indicated is that Putin, of course, we don't know this, but that he didn't want NATO missiles, 50 miles or 75 miles from Moscow. And the same way we didn't want missiles in Cuba. But enough for that. Let me just switch because I want to get one other subject for you before we run out of time here, which is the budget. So I played a clip earlier that Speaker Johnson says they're going to get a budget tonight. Do you think they're going to get a budget tonight? And where do you think that is all headed? And
if they do, I think it'll be a miracle. I mean, I'll just be amazed. Right now, the balance of the House is 218 Republicans to 215 Democrats, and the only reason it's 218 is because Elise Stefanik, who Trump nominated to be the UN ambassador, has not resigned. They haven't let Elise Stefanik go be the UN ambassador because they need her vote in the House so much. But anyway, all Mike Johnson, the Speaker, can do is lose one vote, if all the Democrats show up. One vote, and if he loses two, he loses the vote. So, we've already heard Thomas Massey say he's not going to vote for this. Of course, he's probably not going to vote for anything. The idea that nobody else is going to go along is pretty amazing. And if Johnson can pull it off, and by the way, they did pull it off in the Speaker's election, if he can pull it off, that'll be incredible.
Let me ask you this, Byron York, because let's just say they pass this. This is just a broad outline. So it has the $4 trillion or whatever at the moment tax extension or cut extensions, whatever you want to call them. But we don't know exactly what they are, and a certain amount of spending cuts of $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion, whatever it is, and we don't know what those are. So let's just say they pass it. Isn't the really tough part once those details are put in? Because go ahead.
I don't fully understand how this process works, but one of the parts of the cutting spending process, is they've decided to allocate a certain amount that needs to be cut by committee. That is, the Armed Services Committee needs to cut X number of $billion, or the Intelligence Committee needs to cut X number of $1 billion in spending, or the various committees need to cut spending in their area of jurisdiction. And it's not written down. I mean, it's not set up. You're right. This is a very early vote that really does not get into the details of the problem.
Byron York, thank you so much. You can find him on Fox News. You can follow him on X at Byron York. Can you believe it? It's actually his name on X, which is not me. I'm at Look There's your Chris Stapleton, Generalissimo. You wanted Chris Stapleton, you got Chris Stapleton.
Now we actually are talking about country music.
I see. Who else qualifies as country music to you?
I'm actually okay with Rose and Dolly Parton. She's like She's pretty good.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, anyway, so I want to talk to you all about gold for a minute and AmericanFederal.com. Now, let me tell you my perspective on gold, as long as I don't knock my earpieces because I gesticulate too much out of my ears. But AmericanFederal.com is actually not too far from my house in Scottsdale, Arizona. And that's where Nick Grovich is. And he's at 1-800-221-7694. And Nick and I have not met yet, but when I return to Scottsdale next week, I am going to call Nick and set up and go have a meeting with Nick, because I have a lot of paper gold and I have some physical gold, but not as much physical gold as I would like to have. And my view of gold is simply this: it's insurance. People say to me, well, why do you want gold? And there's a lot of financial advisors that don't like it very much at all. My view is gold should be 5 to 10% of your, and I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. I'm just telling you what I do for myself, which is I have somewhere between 5 and 10% of my liquid assets in gold. Some is paper gold, but I'm planning to convert a lot of that into physical gold, like you can buy at AmericanFederal.com. And what I see it as is insurance. It's insurance against your government messing up the value of your currency. Now, if you had lived in Turkey the last 5 years, your gold would have saved your life, because gold would be up 200% or 300% in value. Same in Japan, same in China, same in a whole lot of other countries, because those countries' currencies went down. Lately, the dollar has been fairly strong, but that's not always the case. I often tell the story, I bought my first house in Irvine, California in 1978. And I paid a little over $100,000 for it. I looked at it the other day to see what its value was on one of the websites. And it said that its value was $2 million now. So it's gone up 20 times since 1978. But I also then figured out in terms of the value of gold. And in terms of weight of gold, ounces of gold, it's exactly where it was. Okay, the value of my house did not go up. The value of the dollar went down. And that's what inflation does. And that's certainly what's happened the last few years. And that's what I think gold protects you from. It's insurance for that. Doesn't pay you interest, but it's insurance for that. So call Nick Grovich at 1-800-221-7694 or go to AmericanFederal.com. And you can follow me. You can read my stuff at lookthroughthechaos.com or follow me at lookthroughchaos, THRU, at Look Through Chaos on X. Former Congressman John Campbell filling in for Hugh Hewitt today on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hugh will be back with you tomorrow. For those of you who have listened to Hugh Hewitt for 25 years, you have heard my voice either as a guest or a guest host all over that time. For those of you that are fairly new to the Hugh Hewitt Show in the last few years, when I wasn't guest hosting in the middle, when he ran the program in the middle of the night, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, raised my kids in Orange County, California, was a member of the California State Legislature, both in the Assembly and the Senate, and then elected for 5 terms to Congress from California, and then moved to Arizona. And that is why our next guest is Mr. Steve Hilton, who you see on Fox News. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but you live in California now.
Yes, I've been here now for, well, when did we move here? 2012 from the UK, so getting on for 13 years. Proud to be a Californian, but totally focused now on all the reasons that so many people are leaving our beautiful state. I'm an American now, as well as a proud Californian, for those who aren't familiar with my story. Before moving here, I was senior advisor to British Prime Minister David Cameron. So before my work with Fox, I've been very much involved in the government and policy making realm, as well as being an entrepreneur. I started a tech company here in Silicon Valley where I live. So yeah, I've had the whole American dream story, the California dream. But the point is, it's totally collapsed for most people. We have the highest housing costs in the country. We have the highest prices for every essential, for energy, for water, for electricity, all these things are a disaster. The crime, the homelessness, we have the worst business climate in America 10 years in a row. It's all captured in the name of the title of my book, which is about to come out. It's called Caliphalia, Reversing the Ruin of America's Worst Run State. That's what it is. California is the worst run state in America, but the good news is we can turn it around, and that's what I've really been working on the last few years with a new policy organization I set up called Golden Together. And there are answers to all these problems. And there are ways to restore California to the glory that I'm sure you remember and wish could happen again. But it will. I think it really will, because people are sick of what's going on. They're demanding change, and I think we're going to get it.
Yes, we have a lot in common. I was actually chairman of the U.S.-UK caucus, and I was there under part of Cameron's prime ministership and also Gordon Brown's prime ministership. But so I went to the UK a lot, had a lot to do with all those people, and was also an entrepreneur. And so we have some similarities. But I left California. I flew. 9 years ago. In fact, I told, and I'm a native, and I told all my friends, I said, look, if I thought it wasn't going to get any worse, I'd stick it out. I'd grumble, and I'd stick it out. That was 9 years ago. It has gotten worse. What is it? What are the? And this may be an unfair question. There's so much wrong, as you say. Worst run state. Hawaii's close, by the way, for being a badly run state. But worst run of the continental U.S. Let's certainly put it that way. Yeah. What are the 1, 2, or 3 biggest things if you say we have to change this, or this?
Well, let me just preface that by saying, what is the underlying driver of all this? Why has this happened? And the fundamental reason, I think, is one-party rule. It is just not healthy for one party to be in control of everything. And that's certainly been the case. I mean, what years were you in the legislature?
I was in the legislature from 2000 to 2005.
Yeah, so you're at the beginning of that. The last time Republicans controlled either chamber was at 97, I believe, something like that.
94, I think. No, 97. You're right. 97 was one. It just had the assembly for a little bit, but no, I was in the minority.
Exactly.
But I was also there during part of Governor Schwarzenegger, so at least we had a governor for a while, which gave us some clout.
So the thing is that you've got this one-party rule, and it breeds arrogance and complacency and corruption and cronyism, and that's what's been going on in California. And so the political argument has just gone further and further and further to the left, with no check on that. And the Democrats who've been in charge don't see any kind of pressure coming from the other side, so they just go further and further left. So that's the real driver of it. In terms of the actual specific issues, I mean, if you ask people what is the number one reason for leaving the state, as people are in their hundreds of thousands, and the question is, why would anyone leave such a beautiful place as California? Well, the number one reason people give is housing costs. The median house price in California is just over $1 million now. I mean, this is insane. Back, there was a time when we had the cheapest, most affordable housing in the country, going back to the origins of what we now think of as the golden age, the California dream. It's completely impossible for a regular working personal family to actually own a home now. I mean, 15% of our population can afford the median house price based on income. So that's number one. Then you look at the public schools, which are a complete disaster, particularly for working class families. And that is something that is completely in the control of the state government and it's just been run completely into the ground. You have housing, you have education, the basics of life. And then the final one, I'd say, if you're looking at the top 3, is this question of the business climate. Because that if the jobs are going, if businesses are relocating, then you're not going to have the opportunities. And that really captures what this far left Democrat one-party rule has done. It's just created this incredible bloat in the government, this enormous bloated government, endless rules and regulations and bureaucracy. It's impossible to do anything in California. You can't build anything, you can't run anything. It's a complete nightmare. I mean, these people in charge, they've doubled the budget of the state of California in the last 10 years. Everything's gotten worse, and people are leaving, and yet they're spending twice as much. And so I think really at the heart of it is if there's one thing that needs to be fixed, is actually to get rid of this nanny state bureaucracy that's just standing in the way of people pursuing their dreams, whether that's how to raise their families or start and run a business. It's just impossible to get anything done in California. So that's probably the first place I'd start, because if you get rid of that bloated bureaucracy and the overregulation and the taxation, then you do start to make it affordable to own a home. You do start to make it possible for people to run businesses and to raise families the way they want. So I think I would start there with, I suppose some people are talking about Doge California. I think it's bigger than just cutting the spending. You've got to get into all the endless regulations and bureaucracy that just make life a misery for anyone trying to do anything in this beautiful state.
And for those of you who live in the other 49 states and are wondering why are we going to spend so much time here talking about California, is because there was always an old saying that what happens in California happens in the nation later, and that was largely true. And for a lot of my lifetime, certainly the early part of my lifetime, it was true, and it was a good thing. And because California was a place of discovery, it was a place of innovation, it was a place of actually of freedom. And you think of whether it's cars, people who design and do cars, to technology, to aerospace, where it used to be aerospace and so forth. There was all these industries that began in California and grew in California because it had that spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation and discovery, where you could make new things happen. And now, as you say, the regulations get in the way. So that's why we're talking about this, because this is headed to your way, Colorado. It's already there.
Let me put it this way. Let me put it this way, John. So you're exactly right. And if you look at all the most pernicious and destructive ideological policies that have been pushed onto the rest of America in the last few years, they've all originated here. You can go down the list. So the climate extremism, that started here with they call it the Global Warming Solutions Act. It's nearly 20 years ago now. That's the precursor to the Green New Deal. All the insane, bans on gas stoves and gas cars and all that kind of stuff started here in California. You can go down the list. The race and gender extremism, what's going on in terms of parents' rights in schools, all of this stuff, the minimum wage increases that are off the charts, one thing after another, the power of the unions and the legislation that entrenches that. Ballot harvesting, there's another one for you. All of these things originated here. And so the way I've put it is that really in the last 20 years or so, California's become the Wuhan lab of far left extremism. They've been cooking up this ideological virus, and it's been sent out and infected the rest of the country. So if you want to beat this stuff, you've got to beat it here in California.
Say, I have to read something that you tweeted out just before this on X. See, it's all going to be solved because Governor Newsom said, and I'm reading you forward to his tweet, we're launching a new platform to bring Californians together, to engage, interact, and share ideas that will help shape government services and create policy solutions. Government works better when we build it together, which means making it easier for everyone to get involved. Steve Hilton, Governor Newsom is going to solve all this
with a website. It's brilliant. It's so great. Look, first of all, someone pointed out, like, where was
Can I hold on? Let me stop you because can I keep you another segment?
Please, it'd be a pleasure.
Okay, great. I'll hold you through the break because I want to ask you about. It's great to talk about this, but we got to elect some people who are going to change it. And I want to talk to you about how difficult it is to do that in California and how we might get that accomplished. Steve Hilton is talking about changing some things that might make people like me not leave so much anymore. Now, Steve, before the break, I teased that one of the things is, there will be a governor's race up in 2 years. And obviously the legislature is up every 2 years, or at least half the Senate is, and all the Assembly is. And if you're going to change things in California, you got to change people. You got to change the governor. You got to change some of the other constitutional offices, perhaps. And certainly you have to make some inroads in the legislature where the Democrats have 75% majorities in both the Assembly, that's the lower house, what they call it in California and a few other states, and the upper house, the Senate. So how does let's take the statewide, the constitutional office, governor, and so forth. How do you win a race? How does a Republican win a race in California? Let me just give people one perspective. Donald Trump did 10 points better in 2024 than he did in 2020. 10 points better. Improvement. That's a significant change. But he still lost by 20 points to Kamala Harris. I understand he lost to somebody from California. I get that. That's an advantage for Kamala Harris. But she was a terrible candidate. We all know that. And he still lost by 20 points. So how does somebody win in California, Steve Hilton?
Let me address this directly. It's something I've been thinking about very much, and for a reason which people may have heard expressed in other outlets, including on Fox News, which is that I am seriously considering running for governor of California in 2026, evaluating that, doing the work to see if the support is in place to do that. And here are some facts that people need to understand. When I hear this the whole time, it's impossible for a Republican to win. First of all, let's just make one thing clear. It's impossible for California to recover unless a Republican wins. That's the only way that we save this beautiful state, which matters so much,
Agreed.
not just to us here in California, but to the nation as a whole. So let's look at the numbers. First of all, this is a much more Republican state than people think, or that the media and the Democrats want you to think. So if you just look at the last 20 years of statewide elections, since the last time a Republican won statewide, the average Republican vote is 41.7%. So that's not 50%, but it's a lot higher than a lot of people think. Then you look at the legislature and you ask yourself, well, is there a 40% representation? Just call it 40% of Republicans in the legislature? No, not at all. It's more like 20%. Why? Because of Democrat gerrymandering. So that supermajority, as they call it, in the legislature is totally illusory. It's not. It's based on gerrymandering. The votes are there to do much, much better in the legislature. Now let's go back to statewide and look not at the percentages, but the number of votes. If you look at the number of votes cast for Donald Trump and for Steve Garvey, the Senate candidate, in November's elections last year, over 6 million votes. Now, if you look at 2026, that is a midterm election where you typically have a lower turnout. And here's the simple fact that everyone needs to understand. If not even everyone, but if most of the people who voted for Donald Trump in California or Steve Garvey, the Senate candidate, if most of those people vote for the Republican candidate in 2026, that person will win. That person will win. And so the answer to your question, how do you do it, is you've got to energize the existing Republican voters. There are more than enough Republican voters who just voted, not potential Republicans or people that need to be converted from being an independent or a Democrat or whatever. Of course, we should do that as well. But just actual Republican voters, Trump voters. There are more than enough of them to actually win in 2026. The challenge is to get them to vote in a midterm election to turn around the fortunes of their home state. What does that all come down to? A strong, clear message, and argument and policy platform for change. That's what's going to do it. So people really believe that if they bother voting for a Republican in 2026, things are going to change. So I see this as an absolutely winnable race in 2026 if you have that strong, clear message of change.
Okay, so now let me ask you another challenging question about this. As you mentioned earlier, vote harvesting, and as you say, California is the where vote harvesting started. You know, it birthed this whole terrible idea. And you know, in many states, I have a farm and a ranch in Kansas. In Kansas, you have to show a voter ID to vote.
Yes.
In California, it is illegal to show an ID. If I go in,
Yes.
if I go in and say I'm Steve Hilton, and vote before you go in, and then you come in, they'll take my vote. And then you go in and say, I'm Steve Hilton. And you say, well, you've already voted. And they say to you, and you say, well, I'll show you my ID. No, I can't see that ID. Can't see it. Not allowed to see it. Can't see it. And so they'll take your vote as a provisional ballot and then they'll throw it out. And so I got to vote for you. And we know that they do all mail ballots. So you can pick up hundreds of mail ballots lying on the side of the street for illegals or for whoever and fill them out for whoever the Democratic candidate, for Kamala Harris, or whoever the Democratic candidate is, and turn them in. So one of the things I've said, and I'm throwing this out to you to say, am I wrong? I want to be wrong on this, by the way. I've said that you have to win legitimately by about 8 to 10 points in California to make up for the cheating that the Democrats do, the vote harvesting that they do on their side. What do you say?
Well, I think so many of the point, I agree. It's a total mess. Again, an example of the worst run state in America. Funnily enough, I was in Ohio last night with, I was supporting Vivek Ramaswamy launching his bid for governor of Ohio, speaking at his two launch events in Cincinnati and Columbus. And I was talking to the Secretary of State of Ohio, great guy, who actually has put in place some of the best voting procedures and rules in the country. A lot we can learn from here in California. Let's just take those in turn. Voter ID, by the way, I'll address the point, but there's a little bit of optimism here as well. Why did that ban on voter ID happen in California? I'll give you the answer. It's a place you know well. It's in Orange County, Huntington Beach, great city led by great friends of mine. 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, it was a Democrat-controlled city council, 6-1 Democrat Republican. 2 years ago, 2022, My friend Tony Strickland, who you may know,
I
put together a team
served with Tony. I served with Tony in the
There you are. I thought
legislature.
you would.
Know him well. Yep.
Exactly. So he put together a great team to take control of the city council. They won 4-3. They immediately started implementing common sense Republican policies on crime and cleaning up the city and all these things, including voter ID, which they put on the ballot. And the people of Huntington Beach voted for voter ID. Two things happened. First of all, in this most recent election in November, they swept the board. That is now 7-0 Republican controlled. You've gone from 6-1 Democrat to 7-0 Republican in 4 years. That shows what you can do with a strong, clear message. But on voter ID, pretty much the next day after it was passed by the voters in Huntington Beach, Gavin Newsom and Rob Bonta, the state attorney general, turned around and said, "We're suing you." But that lawsuit's still going on, and they got their cronies in the legislature to pass this ridiculous legislation banning it across the state. Now, the answer to that and all the other issues, like the ballot harvesting, is say, just as President Trump said in the general election, we got to make it too big to rig, swamp the vote. That is
Right.
the answer. That's how we win in California.
Steve Hilton, where can people follow your work other than Fox
At
News?
Steve Hilton X is the best place. Very
Okay.
active on X. Look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much.
Very
It was
good.
great
Thanks
to
so
be
much,
with you.
Steve. I want to talk for a second about educationfreedomusa.com. Educationfreedomusa.com. When I was in Congress for 10 years, and people would come to visit, friends of mine, people I knew, and so forth, and I would drive them around and take them places, and I'd drive past the Department of Education. It's a great big old building there on Independence Avenue, and big old building. And I would drive by that building and I would tell people, if the earth opened up and that building fell down to the center of the earth and just disappeared, the only people that would miss it would be the families and friends of the people in the building, because nothing it does is of any value to anybody. I have been in favor of eliminating the Department of Education for decades, and I certainly hope that's something Donald Trump and Doge and so forth is able to accomplish. But what educationfreedomusa.com is about is bringing education closer to the people being educated, to the kids and to their parents. Because the farther away you get from the school, the farther away you get from the child, the worse the education becomes. The worst thing is when it's managed at the federal government level, which is absolutely absurd. And then when you get to the state level, that's better. But it's still not as good as being at the local level and having parents in charge, having parents able to control their kids' education. And that's what Education Freedom USA is about. Go on educationfreedomusa.com and see the work they're doing and how you might help. I think about education and the left. One of the interesting things about education is I remember when I first started in politics 25 years ago, there were some issues that the Democrats owned. And the environment was one of them, and education was one of them. And we were all hoping, you remember No Child Left Behind that Bush did in George W. Bush in his first term? And what was that about? That was about trying to grab the education issue back from the Democrats because they owned it. They don't own it anymore. And they don't own the environmental issue either. And it's because they've gone wacko. I'm trying to understand what exactly the left is doing. I mean, when you think about what they're about, okay, they're about transgenders, this tiny fraction of the population that somehow we all have to give up women's sports, do all kinds of stuff. That this is the great issue of our time. Because they keep encouraging people to be transgenders, there are more today, supposedly, than there were when it really was about a 1/100th of 1% of the population. But they're doing that. They have their whole climate change, the Green New scam, and that going on. That's one of their big issues. Certainly abortion for everybody all the time for free. Let's abort everybody we can type thing. Open borders. America involved in all kinds of wars around the world and weakness, and spend more money. And by the way, we don't care if we waste it. You look at those issues: transgenders, Green New Scab, abortion, open borders, wars, and spend more money. What are they thinking? And they're doubling down on this stuff. That's the thing I can't believe. They're doubling down. You would think after this election that they would realize, you know what? Maybe this stuff isn't working. And a few of them think that. A few of them recognize that. But and I think a lot of normal, everyday Democratic voters, if they're paying attention, see that this is not the Democratic Party. Forget 50 years ago or 30 years ago or 20 years ago. This is not the Democratic Party of 10 years ago. These people are out there on issues that are 80-20 issues against them, and they're doubling down on it. I really don't understand, except that the only explanation, as far as I'm concerned, is that the Democratic Party has become a money and influence laundering machine. And there's a lot more to say about that and why I say that, and that's a pretty intense thing to say, but that's really all they are. They're about money and they're about power. And what it takes to get there, the policies, who cares? Because as long as I got money and I got power, it doesn't matter what we do. If you want more of me, you can find me at lookthroughthechaos.com. I write a blog about weekly on there, or you can find me on X, formerly Twitter, at Look Through Chaos. That's THRU. Look Through Chaos, at Look Through Chaos. Okay, so I want to play a clip here that will lead me into something that I care a lot about and have thought a lot about. This is going to be Caroline Levitt at the White House press briefing today. Play clip number 3, please.
Ruling by Judge McFadden yesterday, who dismissed the lawsuit that AP brought against yourself and your team members here, President Trump. In there, he said, why not just do away with the entire White House Correspondents Association along with it, because essentially they have no authority. They just usurped it. What is your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, John, it's great to see you. And you are one of those individuals who has you're on a streaming platform that hundreds of thousands of people tune into every day. So it's great to see you in the briefing room. I did address that actually in my opening remarks by announcing that the White House press team in this administration will determine who gets to enjoy the very privileged and limited access in spaces such as Air Force One and the Oval Office. There are, as you know, look at this room, hundreds of journalists who show up to this building every single day and are not granted that luxury of flying on Air Force One and asking the President of the United States questions. And so we want to ensure, again, everyone has a seat at that highly coveted table. But alas, the legacy media outlets who have been doing this for quite some time and have invested resources into covering the White House, their spots will remain, just like they have in this briefing room as well.
I've been on Air Force One. It's cool. It's cool to be on Air Force One. So, in the past, when it's always been NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, et cetera, it's what we've called the mainstream media or the legacy media, but I like to call the propaganda media and the old media. They have been propaganda outlets for the left for decades, absolutely for decades. And it is only lately that more and more people have recognized it. And what has made the change is the new media, is the fact, the first new media, if you will, was talk radio, which was started by Rush Limbaugh in 1988. That was the first new media. And it was the first time where Rush Limbaugh and others recognized, you know what? If you want to hear a conservative viewpoint, you can't hear it on the nightly news. You can't hear it in your local newspaper. So they created an outlet, and then talk radio took off, and you have this show and so forth now. And now you have it on television, which is an additional part of this. But there's podcasts, there's blogs, there's now X, which Twitter was obviously all to the left, and now you have X, which is a balance. But anybody could go on X. There's a lot of lefties on X. I follow some lefties on X because I always felt when I was in Congress that you could not defeat your opposition unless you understood your opposition. You have to understand why they think what they think, what they're doing, what their objectives are in order to. So I wanted to understand them and understand their reasoning, and I still do. And although their logic, if you want to call it that, is becoming harder and harder to figure out exactly what they were doing. But what I think this White House is doing, and what I think you just heard from the press secretary for President Trump, is absolutely great. Because there's the old saying, oh, you don't, this goes back decades. And by the way, I come from a family, my grandfather was the managing editor of the largest newspaper in Los Angeles throughout most of the middle of the 20th century. And my father wrote for the business section of that newspaper for 40 years, as I recall. So I come from a newspaper family. And so I understand a little bit, or I have some media, if you will, in my blood. But we needed alternative media, and now we have it. But there was always this saying: you can't fight people who buy. Can't remember exactly what it was like. It was like paper by the ream and ink by the gallon, or ink by the barrel. Ink by the barrel and people by the ream. Back then, when newspapers were the majority, this is, I think, a phrase from the 30s or 40s probably. And so what they were saying is don't fight. It's like don't fight City Hall, right? You don't do it. They're the newspaper. They'll destroy you. You can't go against them. You can't do this and that. And one of the things you see Donald Trump and his people, like Carolyn Leavitt, doing is they are going after that old media. They are going after the media that told us the Russian disinformation, that told us that the Hunter Biden laptop was fake, that told us all these things that weren't true. And they are going after that media and going after them directly, and good for them. Because if we're going to have disruption, which we need in the federal government, to change things at all levels of the federal government, if we're going to make America great again, one of the ways we have to do it is through some of those things that have stood in the way. And certainly the old media, the propaganda media, has stood in the way. And the fact that there are other media now and that they're doing this is absolutely great and absolutely fabulous. I want to pivot just for a minute and a half here and talk a little bit about economics. I'm trying to do too much because I have one day, so I'm going to try and do too much in a short period of time. But I am an economic guy. I'm a CPA. My master's is in taxation. My undergraduate's in economics. And so I know a lot of this stuff. And the economy that Donald Trump and Scott Bessent are trying to create is one that has growth, and they want 3% growth, better growth than we have today, but with low inflation. And to get low inflation with growth, what they're counting on is energy prices coming down, because it's hard to get low inflation with a lot of growth. But that's what they're going to try and do. They want to see long-term interest rates drop down, another thing that's hard to do, and they want to see the national debt reduced. Those are 4 objectives that this administration has. To do 3 of those things is really hard, and often tips the other one the other way from what you want it to do. To do all 4 is truly a camel through a needle. It is difficult to do. But these are some really smart people. I don't know that I want to bet against them. I'm not sure that that's the wise bet. It's going to be hard. Don't misunderstand. The economics is almost the hardest thing this administration has to do. A few quickie things as we close out the show today. About an hour or so ago, Mr. Trump said that, you know how you get a green card when you come into America as an immigrant, that he wants to create a gold card. And the gold card would be that you come in, you bring $5 million with you, that you give that money to the government to pay down the debt, to pay down the national debt. It doesn't go into get spent anywhere. It goes directly to pay down the national debt. And you probably have to employ people and some other things. The left will go nuts over this idea because, you're just rich people. You're just a rich person bringing in more rich people. But you know what this does? This helps everybody in America who's not rich. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. When you bring in a bunch of immigrants who suck off the American welfare system and who fill up the emergency rooms and the hospitals and the doctors and take all the stuff that's meant for citizens, you hurt the average American. You bring in people with a bunch of money that start to pay down the debt. That helps the average American. Good idea. I like it. Here's an idea I don't like. In Wisconsin, they're changing language officially, or proposed to change language officially on a bunch of stuff where a mother is no longer a mother. It's now an inseminated person. The Captain and Mrs. Campbell is a mother of 2. When I get home this afternoon, I'm going to say, hello, inseminated person, because that's apparently what they're going to do in Wisconsin going forward. I want to rest in peace for a gentleman by the name of Jim Hoy. Many of you won't know who this is. This is a Kansan who passed away over the weekend. He is the only person who taught a class, which he taught at Emporia State University, in cowboy lore. This is a real American cowboy. Why do I say that? He's a great guy. I knew him. But cowboy lore, the cowboy is part of what made America great. It is that idea of that strength, of that independence, of that freedom, of that ability to go where you want to go and do what you want to do. The cowboy is emblematic of what America is. And Jim Hoy taught cowboy lore and about what that was, and he was an American. But then on the other side of things, I talked to someone today who has a company, and an illegal alien filled out bad forms to go to work for them, and now are suing them because they're letting them go. How is it that an illegal who crosses the border, commits a crime, comes into America, fakes documents to get a job, and then sues that employer? Why are they even allowed to do that? Why can that even happen? I don't know and don't understand. Hugh Hewitt Show and Hugh Hewitt listeners in America, it has been a privilege to sit in this chair. It has been about 8 years since I did this, and it has been a privilege to do this, to be here to fill in for Hugh Hewitt, who has done so much to educate me, and I think all of you, on what's going on in America and how we can all help. And you know what? This is a great country. It has been a great country, and it's going to be a great country because we are all filling in, because we are all going to put our oars in the water and row to make America great again. Drive fast and live free.